Again, I kindly invite you to take your seats as we have reconvened. Thank you so much for your cooperation. The best place for presentations over number 2. So you're doing a presentation? So best place to sit is there. Okay. Yeah, and you can present from there. Oh, okay. If that's, yeah. So I'm just going to direct your attention to microphone number 2 and 3 over here for Nicole, Chief of Staff, as well as for Chief Rebecca David, as that's the best place for the presentation. So you will also, they'll be talking to you from there, but you'll be looking over here at their slideshow. So I invite you to start. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Chief Rebecca David, Paquetchon First Nation, also the BC representative for the National Indian Brotherhood. I'd just like to thank everyone for being here today, and we're going to cover and give you guys a little bit of a snapshot of what happens at NIB and how to apply for the funding. I've been appointed to be the BC representative. I joined on February 2016, and so I just kind of want to share with you guys information about NIB. So as you look in front up on top, there's a highly competitive application process funding through the NIB Trust. So there's a separate application process for each form. We have groups and organizations as well as individuals. So the groups are for any First Nations or Métis governments or communities listed as qualified donee with Canada Revenue Agency. Our First Nation or Métis nonprofit organizations or societies listed as qualified donee with the Canada Revenue Agency. This includes other organizations that provide educational programs to First Nations or Métis. We also have individuals, and the individual scholarships and bursaries and awards are for First Nations or Métis citizens over the age of 18 with a valid social insurance number. Individual applications will be funded for post-secondary education, training and certification in cultural, traditional, and language knowledge building. Individuals do not require special status or recognized by Canadian Revenue Agency. So I'd like to show the competition. There's a high competition that comes in. And so looking at the individual call of application statistics, this is what the NIB has been able to provide for you. So as you can see, we have BC compared with the Canadian average. In our first call out in 2016 and 17, we had 1,180 applications come in. We were only able to approve 138. So out of the approval, we had 11.6% that was approved, but out of the Canadian average, there was 18.2% that was approved. The amount requested from BC alone, the high competition, we had $18.6 million requested from BC. To be approved, all we had was $1.2 million to approve, and that's how we managed to successfully help 6.75% of those that approved in the applications. But when you're comparing and looking at the Canadian average again, you look at BC's second call out in the 2017 and 18, we had less people apply, but also we had less money to approve those. Just as I'm covering some of these statistics, I'm going to also turn it over to our Chief of Staff, Nicole Callahoo, to be able to give you more information and more in depth from a staff perspective. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Nicole Callahoo, originally from Treaty 6 territory in Alberta. I'm Cree, Saulteaux, Sioux, Stoney, Mohawk. Thank you for inviting me to give a presentation to you. For the individual call for applications, individuals are First Nations or Métis citizens over the age of 18 with a valid social insurance number. Individuals can apply for up to $20,000 for education activities that would take place from September to August. Now, successful applicants will be funded under 3 different areas. One is scholarship, and that's for post-secondary education, bursary for training and certification, and award for cultural, traditional, and language knowledge building. Preference is provided to former students of residential schools. Individuals do not require qualified donee status. And just a note, successful applicants will receive a T4A for any funds that come from the NIB Trust Fund. This is a process, it's, I guess, part of the reason, how can I put it? The reason why we have to do T4As to successful applicants is we are a charity and a trust. According to charity law, individuals that receive scholarships and or awards from us must receive a T4A at the, for any funds received. Important dates for individuals is every April the call will open for individuals. Every early June the call will close. In early September, we hope to get funding decisions out to applicants. And in September, the first payment for individuals will be released. There is a 10% holdback for successful individuals. After we receive a transcripts or confirmation of completion of the training or an award report form, the remaining 10% will be released to an individual. Individuals can apply online, or if they're applying for an award program, they can apply it through paper. If you apply online, you need an email address, the front and back of your status card, most recent transcripts, and a letter of enrollment or registration in the program that you wish to attend. It's a similar process for the bursary program. But for the award program, it's a little bit different. If you're applying online, you also need an email address, the front and back of your status card, but also a letter from your cultural expert or elder, the person that's going to teach you whatever activity you want to learn. If you apply in a paper format, we require a copy of your front and back of the status card, also the letter. Please note that typed applications are for those that are under the age of 50, and handwritten applications are accepted for those over the age of 50. During the call for applications, we do have a 1-800 number where there are staff to answer any inquiries and provide assistance. We are located in Ottawa, so it is a 3-hour time difference. Please note that each application should be unique, so there shouldn't be a cut and paste applications for individuals. The activity should be for your own personal learning. So if you're applying for the award program and you want to teach something, those activities are actually ineligible. But if you're applying for the award program and you wanted to learn something from somebody, then of course that is eligible activity. The application process is very competitive. Funds are not guaranteed. And although individuals can apply for up to $20,000, typically the amount approved has been between $3,000 to $5,000. Late applications will also not be accepted. So for groups and organizations, do you want to go through the statistics? Or I can? Okay. So the initial call for the groups in 2016-2017, we received 164 applications from BC alone. We approved 14 applications, which is 8.5% of the approved in BC. The request for BC was $55 million. We actually had just under $1 million to provide in the province of BC. For the most recent call for applications for 2017-2018, there were 55 applications received, 16 approved, which brought up our averages quite substantially. But the amount of money is still in and around the same. So 8.1 million requested with 1.3 million to provide. So 16% of the funds that were requested were approved. In Canada, we had the same similar, I guess, competition. So In order to be eligible, groups must be listed as a qualified donee under CRA at the time of application. This is a policy from legislation regarding charities. Because the NIB Trust Fund is a charity, we actually must only get applications or approve applicants that are qualified donees. If you do not know if your First Nation is a qualified donee, please come and see us at the booth and we can actually look that up for you. The First Nation or Métis nonprofit organizations or societies listed as qualified donees or charities are also eligible. And other organizations that provide education programs to First Nations or Métis and individuals are listed as qualified donees with CRA at the time of application. So the next call for applications that's coming up is the group call for applications. So it'll open in November, early November. It'll close mid-January with funding decisions in March and funding flowing for April. Typically, the funds go out the door in a 50-40-10 period. The 40 after the mid-year report and financial report, and the 10% after the final and activity report. There is an audit that is required for groups receiving over $100,000. Groups and organizations can only apply for online projects. However, there are 3 different types of projects groups can apply for. One is a local community project, the other is a regional or provincial project, and the third is a national project, or sorry, a national project that's reaching across Canada. All of the material for each application is pretty much the same. We need the qualified donee status, partnership letters if required, an audit, copy of the audit, last year's audit or most recent audit, list of signing authorities, and a valid email address. Again, during the call for applications, we do have a toll-free number that people can call for support and assistance. Each application should be complete. The online system will not allow you to submit the application unless it is complete. The application process is competitive. We typically estimate that an application will take a week to complete, so allow yourself time to complete that application. Funds are not guaranteed. The average amount approved has been typically below $200,000. In between $35,000 to $100,000. Late applications will not be accepted, and applicants have the ability to apply for multi-year funding. Last year was the first year we approved multi-year funding. In BC, there was one project that received multi-year funding. And now we have questions. So I ran through that pretty quick. But I know people do have questions related to the call for applications and our processes, so.
Thank you very much to Nicole and Chief Rebecca. Hopefully you did receive, everybody did receive a copy of the presentation. I did just get a bit of feedback saying, for some people in the room, this is a little bit awkward, so we'll make sure that we have presentations in hand for everybody as well. So the floor is open for questions at this time. If you just raise your hand, identify yourself, that would be great. And again, ask for everybody's convenience that you use a microphone. Well, you must have done just such a great job, and you are here for...
Yeah, we're at the booth, one of the booths out in the hallway. If you have any specific questions related to last year's application, for instance, or how to apply this year as a group, or if you are a qualified donee, we actually have the ability to search those things for you and give you as much information as you need.
Thank you so very much. Chief Rebecca?
Okay. Yes, please feel free to approach myself as the BC representative, our Chief of Staff, Nicole Calahoo. And yes, we welcome any questions or anything that you may have in the next couple of days. As she said, we have a booth outside, so we welcome any of your comments or questions. Thank you. just for having you here. Nicole.
So thank you so
Wanted
very
to be
much,
able to
Nicole,
thank
for coming and presenting with us today. So, thank you, Chief Rebecca, for presenting that. Thank you. Excellent. Now back over to the financial audit report. At this time, I'd like to call upon Brent Ashbury from KPMG, as well as Shalene Sellers, who's a finance manager with the BC Assembly of First Nations, to please come forward. What tab is it under?
3.
Want to tell them?
Yeah, I will. Morning. Shalene Sellers, Finance Manager for the BC Assembly of First Nations. I am here to help assist with the presentation for the 2016-17 audited financial statements, tab 3 of your binders, also in the annual report as well. I will be here to help assist in any in-depth questions that our auditor may not be able to answer. Thank you, and I'll hand you over to Brent Ashby.
Thank you very much, and good morning. It's my pleasure to be here to present the March 31st, 2017 financial statements of the BC Assembly of First Nations. And as Shalene said, it should be in your package, so I'll walk you through the highlights of the 2017 fiscal year from a financial perspective. I apologize for being a few minutes late this morning. Traffic in Vancouver. So anyways, start with, you flip a couple pages in and you see the auditor's report, which is really the document that belongs to us as the auditors of BCAFN. And it just describes both management's responsibility for the financial statements, because obviously we need management to do their job throughout the year in terms of putting together the financial information and assisting preparing the audit, which we certainly thank Shalene and the Melanie and the rest of the team at BCAFN for that. And then it talks about the auditor's responsibility, and then comes down to the top of the next page is our opinion. So our opinion is an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, meaning the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. And our audit report was dated July 6, 2017. Turning to what's labeled as page 1 of the financial statements is the statement of financial position. And the statement of financial position shows the assets, the liabilities, the non-financial assets, and the accumulated surplus at the end of March 31st, 2017, and also the comparative year, March 31st, 2016. So just taking you through some of the major changes. In total, financial assets increased about doubled where they were last year to $734,000 from $347,000 the year before. A lot of that increase was in accounts receivable. There were significant amounts outstanding at the end of the year from UBCIC and Assembly of First Nations and CCAB. So accounts receivable increased from $167,000 up to $648,000. With some offset in declining cash as a result of that increase in accounts receivable. Liability side, with a lot more programs and increase in revenues and operating programs this year, accounts payable and accrued liabilities were up to $396,000 from $212,000, and deferred revenue was also up as that relates to the UBCIC commitment document, and there was $254,000 approximately of deferred revenue at the end of the year. So liabilities totaled $650,000, up from $296,000 last year, and the net financial asset number has gone up from $50,000 last year to $84,175. The non-financial assets in BCAFN's case just consist of tangible capital assets, so that would be office equipment and furniture and computer equipment. It has a net book value at the end of the year of $97,000, and that's about a $10,000 increase over last year. and there was about $42,000 of additions this year on furniture and fixtures and computer equipment. So that leaves accumulated surplus at the end of the year. As you can see, it's increased over last year from $148,000 to $181,000 at the end of the year, and that's made up of operating surplus of $84,000 and tangible capital asset investment of $97,000 for a total of $181,000. If you move to the next page, which is the statement of operations, so you can see revenues were significantly up over last year, more than doubled the 2016 amount of $1.3 million, and we're at $2,859,000 last year. Certainly much more than budgeted as well, as you can see the budget's in the left-hand column there. So major increases, INAC revenue increased from $483,000 in 2016 to $1,168,000. That's additional funding for regional sessions and the Housing Forum. Ministry of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, or MAR, also was up from $504,000 to $847,000. And National Indian Brotherhood, AFN, also up from $178,000 to $449,000. Some of that being additional funding for the Women's Dialogue session, Housing Forum, and for Climate Project. CCAB also this year, revenue of $254,000 related to economic development projects. And then if you look down, various other sources of income, including rental income on the Vancouver sublease, donation revenue from proceeds from the golf tournament, and also the start of the UBCIC contract. As I said, most of it was deferred last year, but there was $14,000 of revenue recognized in 2017. So again, $2,859,000 in revenue in 2017. Expenses accordingly increased with the number of projects over last year. Administration expenses increased to $1,152,000. A lot of that being wage increases, wages and benefits due to additional staff being hired to carry out these projects, with some decline in other office expenses, as in 2016 was the move and the setup of the office in Kamloops. Consistent expenditures around First Nations Leadership Council at $221,000. Big increase in regional sessions to $775,000 last year from $323,000. And then you can see the other new projects, economic development, just under $200,000 of expenses, the Housing Forum, $298,000, climate project of just under $37,000, and then the Women's Dialogue session on strategic planning, $142,000. So total expenses were $2,826,000 last year. So there was a $32,918 surplus for the year, as compared with a deficit in 2016 of $196,000. So much improved in terms of the surplus and deficit results for 2017. Just point out a couple other pages. I'm not going to go through every page of the financial statement, but if you look at page 4, which is your cash flow statement, I did say cash had decreased during the year, and the reasons why, in terms of if you look under operating activities, you can see that operating activities generated a negative cash of $50,523. A lot of that being because of the large amount of accounts receivable at the end of the year. And then in terms of capital activities, $42,077 was spent on acquisition of tangible capital assets during the year. So a decrease in cash overall of $92,600. In terms of other notes to the statements, you can see that the significant accounting policies are shown in Note 1 to the financial statements. And then Note 2 and Note 3, some additional information on page 7 of the statements in terms of accounts receivable at the end of the year. I did mention some of this as I went through, but you can see where the major sources of receivables were at the end of the year compared with last year. And again, in Note 3, the deferred revenue, all consisting of amounts from UBCIC of the $254,000. Note 4 to the statement just goes through your tangible capital assets and your original cost and your net book value. At the top half, you can see that of the $97,000 in tangible capital assets, that's made up of $27,000 of furniture and fixtures and $69,000, almost $70,000 of computer equipment. The last part I want to go through is the segmented information note, and that's on page 11. You can see sort of by major area or program what the revenues and expenditures were for last year. Starting with administration, you can see that administration on the left-hand column had total revenues of $1,150,000 and expenses of $1,152,000, so basically a small deficit of $1,700. And carrying on across, you can see First Nations Leadership Council, $223,000 of revenue and $221,000 of expense, so about a $2,300 surplus. New Relationship Trust was some funding left over from programs in the previous year of $16,000 surplus there. Regional sessions, obviously a big component of last year. There was $782,000 of revenue, $775,000 of expenses for a $7,000 surplus. And economic development, revenues of $208,000 and an $8,600 surplus. The Housing Forum with $298,000 of revenue and $7 deficit. And the climate, you could see $36,000 of revenues and the same amount of expenses. And lastly, Women's Dialogue session was $142,000 of revenue and $142,000 of expenses for a $43 deficit. So that sort of breaks down the details of the revenues and expenses by segment. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions on last year's audit.
So the floor is open for any further questions about the BCAFN audit report. We have both our auditor as well as our finance manager here. Well, congratulations, you did a great job. Thank you so very much to both of you. And I'm delighted to note that we are a little bit ahead of schedule. So I've actually we checked in and we're bringing forward, so first, thank you. It's refreshing to hear deficits of, like, say, $7. As we're a little bit ahead and we know that there's a lot of work to be done, we did check in, again, with your permission. We approached both Cheryl Casimir and Chief Bob Chamberlain on the tripartite working group on children and families if they were willing to come forward. Now, they were scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9:30, and they have said yes. So with your permission, I'd like to invite them forward so we can hear their report back on their good work. So I'm just making sure that's okay with you. Is there anyone that's not okay with? So we're going to call forward both Chief Bob Chamberlain and, yes. Yes. Come on down, the price is right. So if you're looking for the description, it's the update in children and families that was slated for 9:30 to 10:15. We do have Cheryl here and Chief Bob Chamberlain to report on the tripartite working group on children and families, and we will have Grand Chief Ed John report back on the National Advisory tomorrow. So, yep. If you'd like to sit there, wherever you wish, what works for you. I can bring the microphone 3 over for you there. So microphone 4, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Musqueam and thank them for opening up their doors to their beautiful house and letting us come in and do business. I wasn't quite prepared to be up here right this moment. I don't have my material with me, so I apologize in advance. We were slated to be on the agenda tomorrow afternoon. So I'll do my best to give you the best update that I can, along with my colleague, Chief Bob Chamberlain. We're representing the First Nations Leadership Council on the tripartite working group with representatives from Canada and British Columbia. The BCAFN spot is currently vacant as well at this time until after tomorrow, when we will know who will be joining us. First of all, I just want to start off by acknowledging all of the tragedies and the passings and the natural disasters that we as First Nations people have encountered over the summer. It has been a very, very difficult summer, early fall for a lot of us, and so some of us are still struggling, and I just wanted to extend my prayers and thoughts to those that are still affected. The tripartite working group came as a result of the huge gathering that we had back in May 2015, of which I believe a number of you sitting in here participated in. As a result of that gathering, Canada and British Columbia recognized the need for us to come together and start working in collaboration and partnership in terms of addressing the number of children in care, and to start looking at strategies and plans for trying to address that, and as well as trying to explore options in terms of how First Nations will be able to assume more jurisdiction and authority around child welfare. I believe that there is information in your kit. I'm not sure exactly what tab it is in, but you will find a copy of the signed Reconciliation Charter, which is a high-level document that basically outlines what our commitments are as a tripartite working group. And basically, we are talking about looking at a shared common vision for First Nations child and family well-being. And we're also wanting to work on a transparent political process and relationship. The tripartite working group is to work on concrete actions, 3 of them mainly legislative reform, policy and program development, and an effective fiscal model to support First Nation child welfare in BC. Keeping in mind that we recognize that this is not something that the Leadership Council representatives with Canada and British Columbia can do on our own. We recognize that there is a lot of good work that is happening out in community right now. We understand that there are some agreements that have been entered into by some First Nations who are actually taking that next step in terms of jurisdiction and authority. We also recognize that we cannot do this work alone. We need to do it in partnership, not only with First Nations, but there are other partners as well. The First Nations Health Council has been conducting their regional sessions, and they have been talking to you at regional levels about what your interest and priority are around child and family as well. You'll also find in your kit a copy of the Terms of Reference that's also been approved for the Tripartite First Nations Children and Families Working Group. It gives you an overview of what it is that the goals and objectives of the working group are, what our guiding principles are, and the process that we've identified for ourselves. There is a work plan that we are currently trying to finalize, and we've been finding some difficulty in doing that, some challenges that we faced, particularly related to the elections. With the provincial government, we had no ability to work on our work plan for some period. Then we had to wait until the cabinet was identified and we had a minister. And now, just recently, we also found out that the Department of Indian Affairs has now split into 2, and so we now have a new Minister Philpott. that we have to bring into the picture as well, along with Minister Bennett. So we have yet to have a tripartite meeting, but we are scheduled for October 24th, I believe, to come together and try to advance the work that's been done to date. We've also presented a budget, as I've reported out a few times, to Canada and British Columbia, of which we've been told that we were going to receive support for that budget, but we've yet to receive any funds, at least to my knowledge. At this point in time, I don't believe that any of the organizations have received any funds from Canada or British Columbia. BC has given us a verbal commitment of $300,000 to go towards the work of the tripartite working group, and Canada has committed $150,000 for that work. I think it's important in noting that Canada has said that there are proposal dollars that are available for us to draw down on in the event that we need to do more work and need more resourcing. We've made it quite clear, though, to Canada that this work is too important to be proposal-driven, and if it's to be a true nation-to-nation relationship, we should not be in a situation where we have to write proposals. So we will continue to, along with British Columbia, to apply pressure to Canada to ensure that we receive the appropriate resourcing to do this work. One of the biggest components of the work that is in front of us is engagement. And as I mentioned, the Health Council has undertaken some of that, but we also recognize that not everyone participates in those sessions, so we need to figure out how do we reach out to those people who we see as being the community experts, the people with expertise who are on the ground, the frontline workers, as well as yourselves as leadership, to be able to provide us with the information that is necessary to give us the direction required to do this work. So we are looking at making sure that we have the right amount of resourcing to do proper engagement with community. And that we see is the biggest component of the work that is necessary, along with research. Research is also a huge component in terms of trying to put together models that would be options for First Nations to be able to look at. We know that there's a lot of work that has happened over the decades. Cindy Blackstock is one example of the amount of work that has been done that we need to rely on. We also know that there's been a number of reports by the Attorney General, a number of reports by other organizations that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about what are the options and models for jurisdiction, as well as the examples that we are starting to see come across the province with the work that's happening directly with yourselves. I don't think I have anything more to report, so I will, if I think of anything, I'll share it with you, but at this point that I'm finished, so I'll pass it on to my colleague, Chief Bob Chamberlain.
Gela Kessler Hamas la Lokulatle. Nu guam oedi gaiten la kakwekwa sutinu kwatmis muskumag daudeno. Gela Kessler Vasquion la Yuktamas Wheatla Megan's Nunmakolas Quatnala. Chief Bob Chamberlain, traditional name Owadi from the Kwekwa-Sutinu-Kwakwamis First Nation, Vice President, Union of BC Indian Chiefs. Certainly acknowledging the territories that we're on as the Musqueam First Nation. And I know that I'm very much like everybody else that's in this room is very much looking forward to lunch because we always get taken care of so well while we're here. In terms of my update, excuse me, I really do enjoy following Cheryl in this presentation because she's always so comprehensive at the outset. When I consider the work that's in front of us, of course, I'm mindful of the mandate that's been given to the Leadership Council through the resolutions from the BCAFN, the First Nations Summit, the UBCIC. And so consistent with that mandated direction, we've pursued the work overcoming the challenges of resourcing from the provincial and federal government, and as Cheryl has mentioned, the change of government at the provincial level and how that has paused the work and so forth. But to be confident that the terms of reference and the reconciliation charter have been vetted through the Chiefs and Assembly and supported by resolution, we continue with this very important work. I know yourselves are probably much like myself, and we're thinking about the last engagement that we had to do to advocate for our family and children in regards to MCFD. I recently had a family member that passed away, and hours later MCFD showed up to apprehend the children. And it was just utterly beyond belief that they would even arrive at a time when the family is gathering with 3 social workers in the RCMP. And so it shows me that the on-the-ground work has not changed yet. And the work that we're all doing, whether it's at the Leadership Council level, at the First Nation Health Council, or the national level, that this work is still as critical as it was back when the Tsawwassen Accord was signed. And as I've learned that the Tsawwassen Accord at that time was the genesis or the beginning of the Leadership Council and the organizations coming together to work together collectively, even though there are diverging views on different topics. And given the complexity of all the moving parts in relationship to the changes that are needed for family and children, I would message to all of us as leaders, including myself, and consistent with what my hereditary chief, Uncle Chief Robert Joseph spoke of this morning, is about that reconciliation, about that unity that we would do best to accomplish today as we look at a federal government that is saying things that we've never heard from Canada, that we've got a new provincial government that are saying things that are very reflective, and they're the kind of statements and commitments that we have been, as First Nations, sitting around this table today, but the generations before, have pushed so hard to have established and realized at the tables we sit at. And so as we embrace that, of course, we're looking at enhancement of existing programs and services, but of course, we want much more than that, the recognition of our inherent authority. And the previous provincial government was loath to embrace that word inherent. But this government now, by embracing the UN Declaration, creates that path for us to continue to push for that inherent recognition. And by having that established, it's beyond the tinkering of governments. That authority, as we know, comes from our stories of origin, our territories, and our units of family, community, and nation. But there is so much work going on at this time, it adds another layer of complexity, but I view this as good news. It means that there are many hands at the table, many minds coming together to articulate the problems that we face, but also to bring the solutions that we require for our children and our families. So whether it's the tripartite working group, the work that the Health Council is pursuing, whether it's the provincial government's embracing of Grand Chief Ed John's report or the national level committee, this is a good situation to have such a complex situation. And so we can pull together all of the greatest opportunities, the minds and the people that are most knowledgeable to really chart a path forward that's going to meet the needs of our children. And I am of the same mind as Cheryl, disappointed with the INAC approach of proposal-driven. I believe that this issue has been examined, understood, articulated, recommended many times over. And so it's about sifting through, compiling, bringing back, getting the mandate of chiefs to pursue this. And I've heard loud and clear from many First Nations around the province of British Columbia the need for a province-wide gathering on this topic. But how do we gather the documents which can inform that discussion with clarity? And then leadership can express their views to make sure that the work that gets advanced is one that is directed by the First Nations themselves. And of course, the work we do as the Leadership Council on any given topic is simply to kick the door open and set the table in the best way that we can. And so First Nations can sit down at their own tables with their own cultural understandings, traditions, and values and chart that course for themselves. But to have a table that's set that's going to facilitate that discussion so we don't replicate the pushing open of the door time and again around the province, when we can wrestle the government into a position now where they're open and understanding of some of the more fundamental principles and embracing it and creating that opportunity for individual nations to advance as they choose. And I'm always very clear on the as they choose, because there are many First Nations that devoted a large amount of time, energy, resources, and commitment in advancing their views through the delegated agency model. There are also a number of First Nations that were not afforded that opportunity, or they chose not to pursue that particular path, and now have what I always refer to as the Indigenous approaches. But regardless of the approach, the same goal is there in front of both of them. And as well as the individual nation pursuits, is to have our children looked after by ourselves, consistent with our traditions, values, and culture, and to respect the autonomy of everyone that's sitting around this room, and to ensure that the work we do is to open that door and push the higher level discussion, so the discussions particular to your First Nation won't have that hurdle to overcome at the outset. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you for allowing me a few minutes to speak. I want to thank Cheryl for her comprehensive report. And in closing, I would say that the draft action framework, of course, is still in adjustment period now. And it's a result of the monies that Cheryl spoke of are considerably less than what we had envisioned at the outset. So the work plan is going to have to be adjusted to reflect the availability of resourcing. So I want to thank you, all the chiefs in Assembly, and look forward to your questions. And I know that we'll be here for 3 days, so we could have lots of discussions. Thank you.
While my colleague was speaking, I was able to recall a couple of other things that I think are important to share. First of all, I want to acknowledge Gukbi Judy Wilson for the work that she undertook with as the UBCIC rep on the tripartite working group. Thank you, Gukbi, for that. I should also acknowledge members of the internal working group, and this working group is what provides us direction for when we go to the table with Canada and British Columbia. So we have Warner Adam, Mary T.G., Lise Haddock, she's from the RCY office, Michael Sudefeld, Jennifer Hood, Deb Foxcroft, and we're also looking at expanding the group to include a representative from the Justice Council. They've reached out to us and have asked to be a part of this group, given that they also have a component in their work plan dealing with children in care. We're also looking at inviting a youth in care, an urban representative, and a northern rep. Taku, for example, has approached us and said given the circumstances of them being up in the northern part of the province, they would like to have us consider having them be a rep. We've also extended an invitation to the First Nations Health Council to have a rep as well. I just wanted to let you know that you may have seen a notification come out to you from the province advising that they were distributing $30,000 to go towards preventative measures, and each community in British Columbia should be receiving that. They advised us that this was going to be coming down the pike, and that they really didn't have a lot of time to determine how best to disseminate these funds, given that they had a tight time frame, and it was as per one of the recommendations in Grand Chief Ed John's report. Now, we've been receiving feedback from First Nations and delegated agencies expressing concern to us that $30,000 is a drop in the bucket, particularly if you're looking at trying to put into place maybe a staff person, or to put into place a quality program to address the issue of prevention. BC is aware of that, and in order to try to be fair, they thought this was the best way to do it. However, they also encouraged through that announcement that those First Nations who were a part of a delegated agency, and I'm just using this as an example, could consider pooling those resources and putting it towards the agency so the agency could be able to provide the preventative service dollar or programs at a much larger scale as opposed to just doing it on a $30,000 budget. This distribution is one time only. They have advised us that they're going to be looking at providing future funding in the next fiscal, but they are not looking at doing it the way that they've done it this way. They want to be able to have a conversation. They want to engage with us in terms of what is going to be the best way to provide this funding. Now, I know that some concerns, other concerns were raised that this has nothing to do with us, that the province was putting in expectations from communities that this was going to be ongoing. So I just wanted you to be aware that this is not the case. This is a one-time funding of $30,000. They are going to be exploring other options and other avenues in terms of how to distribute the next pot of funding in the new fiscal. So I just wanted to make you aware of that undertaking. Thank you.
So the floor is open, and microphone number 15, please.
Could be Judy Wilson, Nisconnet. I just wanted to thank Cheryl and Bob, and I was on the committee previously, so I know how much work it is and how much, I guess, calling to task to the federal government, the province, has been really hard. But I wanted to say one thing. Following the dollars, I think, is always really important. And do you remember when you had the Plecas report, the $100 million the province talked about? I think we need to look at the Grand Chief Ed John report, which is commissioned by the province. It's actually a province report as well, of $85 million, and we need to line it up to see what new dollars there really are and how that's flowing. I think there has to be an analysis of that. I think it's great, 30,000 is coming to our communities, but I really would like to see the overall, how the dollars line up and how they compare and then how they're going to flow. I think the Youth and Children Office was going to do an analysis, and I don't know if they've finished with that analysis, but I think it's really important because I think the $100 million allotted under the Plecas report was beefing up the Ministry of Child and Family System. It was actually doing the opposite of what we wanted. And then now we have Grand Chief Ed John's report, the $85 million that we wanted to target more for those changes. So I think there has to be that kind of analysis done to really see what's going on with the dollars and how they're flowing.
Microphone number 22, please.
Chief Queen Halloween from the Chislata Carrie Nation. Hari Soanzan. Just again, thank you for all the great work that you do for the children and families. I just wanted to know if, with regards to the $30,000 and the pooling in service providing agencies, if there's some models out there that our communities could look at in regards to the distribution of actually pooling our monies together, if there's a best method that's out there to take those dollars and use them to the best of the ability of the service agencies. Second question, or I have a question, and it's in regards to the tripartite formation. Just the purpose behind it, and was it to try to access federal and provincial expertise around the table as well as funding? Masicho.
And just for reference, before we go to any answers, I just want to point out that the material that was referred to is all under tab number 5. So,
Chief Judy, thank you for your comments around the analysis, and I believe that the province has developed a chart specifically to Grand Chief Ed John's work and should highlight how much is going to be expended on each category. And I believe that Ed will probably speak to that. I'm not sure if that chart is in the kit. In terms of, however, I do agree that we need to follow up in terms of how do these dollars line up and do a comparison. Chief Karina, we don't have a model per se in terms of the $30,000 and pooling it together, given that it's a new initiative and it's just rolling out now. But I can speak from experience from my agency, the Tinaka Kinbasket Child and Family Services. Our communities have always supported the agency, and I believe that even in an instance like this, that we would be looking to pool our dollars towards our agency to make sure that they are able to provide the best quality service to all of the communities. And so it would be a lot easier for that to happen as opposed to my community trying to work with $30,000. Now, I may be speaking out of turn, but I see my chief down at the end of the table and he's shaking his head. So that's the way we've always done it. So it works best, it works for us. In terms of the tripartite formation, having Canada and British Columbia, we wouldn't be able to do the work without having those two levels of government. And this is the first time in our history that I can remember where both Canada and British Columbia have come to the table prepared and willing to talk about child welfare reform and jurisdiction and authority. And so we've taken advantage of that, and that's why we're sitting at the table with them.
So microphone 9, and then we need to get a microphone over to the lovely lady in green over there. Microphone 9, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Bob. Good morning, Cheryl. Thank you for your report. Thank you, Karina, for raising the need for us as leaders to look at pooling resources. We need to do that at home. We've got communities ranging from a half dozen to 1,000. And so for small populated communities, pretty tough. We have a delegated agency that, depending on any given day, might have 17, 18 communities supporting it. So we need to work through a process ourselves on that very question. How are we going to work together? So what kind of strings are there, if any, Cheryl, on that 30,000 per community? Are there any real strings? Like, I'm not sure I understand it.
Grand Chief Doug, I have no idea. We haven't been shared the details. What we understand is that it needs to be specific to working on prevention, working on what's the word? It's lost my mind now. Connection back to community as well. And so those are the two main areas that Allison Bond had spoke to me about on the phone. It's not funding, though, that can be used for just anything. So there are deliverables attached to those dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you to the lady, to the chief or proxy who identified herself earlier.
Good morning. Chief Vivian Tom with Wet'suwet'en First Nations. With that 30,000, I'm wondering if it's too late to ask if our communities can take the money and use it for our own workers, because, you know, I see the delegated agencies, but with our community, there's so many bands that are in that delegated agency, and it seems like the small bands get left out. We've been through a high turnover rate of family preservation workers, and these guys are supposed to be, girls, are supposed to be going out to the communities and knocking on doors and supporting the 0 to 6-year-olds, the single mothers and fathers, and they hire some workers that are non-native and that are too scared to get out of the health clinic and go door to door visiting. And you know, not all the kids will come to them, not all the community members will come to them. And we're going through quite a bit of tension in the community with suicide attempts on and off reserves. Sometimes my counselors and I, we sit in meetings all day long with MCFD, with a rep from each, with the lawyers for MCFD and for the person that's trying to get their child back. And we found out that this 15-year-old boy, he just turned 15, and he's attempted suicide more than 10 times. You know, enough is enough. We have to put our foot down with MCFD, with the government, provincial and federal, and tell them, you know, if that was your child that was attempting suicide, what would you do? Like I've said before, I've had my 6-year-old granddaughter talk about suicide because she wanted to be with her mom that was murdered. And it's just like catching a cold in a community. They're starting to talk about it like it's prevalent. And with the Grand Chief Ed John's report, I'm hoping that we can also address the children of trauma, the children that have lost their moms and dads, and address the bullying in the communities, because my granddaughter is being bullied and she's had kids tell her, you know, I'm glad that your mom died. And, you know, things like this, we have to protect our kids one-on-one. And I'm getting to the point where I have to walk to the bus and meet my granddaughter so that she's not bullied from the bus to the home. But other than that, we need to have children of trauma addressed with this report, like children of parents that have passed away, children that were taken out of the home, physically, sexually abused in every way, because if that person's development has been traumatized, it's just like their spirit has been cut in so many places that, you know, how can a child grow healthy without fear in their own home? We're doing our best to protect our granddaughter, and she's bubbly, she's just happy-go-lucky, and that's one of my concerns is the children of trauma. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 3, please.
Thank you very much for your questions and comments. I know that all of us as leaders we wear the same shirt, that we have very similar experiences in each and every one of our communities. And when we think about the challenge of keeping our children first together within our family, that's the first step. And when we start to have discussions about how can we help our families and our communities and our nations arrive at a place where this topic of suicide and the trauma is in their past. And as the governments have begun to wake up, begun to acknowledge the atrocities that Canada has implemented on our peoples, when I think of the reconciliation efforts, I think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action and the commitments of both federal and provincial governments. And that's what I spoke of earlier about we've not heard these kind of words of recognition of the responsibility that Canada bears for the state that our people find ourselves. And the very fact of intergenerational trauma that is alive in each and every one of our communities. But how do we come together to create the path which meets our needs directed by our people, by our families, our communities, and our nations? and the work ahead of us of finding that unified path to advance that, to ensure that they're the appropriate tools of, prevention measures where we can build strong, healthy, vibrant families and communities, where we can understand the impacts of the trauma and how that manifests within each and every one of our families, because none of us escape that. And I know each of us as leaders, we experience the sideways sharing of that kind of trauma in the political realms that we walk. But there's so many layers to meet the needs of our people. We have to begin to seize the opportunities that are in front of us and create the path to meet the ones that are not in front of us. In terms of the $30,000 per First Nation, I had a look at the proposal framework. It's not too complex, it's not too complicated. It's up to each individual First Nation to decide how they wish to pursue and implement those dollars into their communities. I know that in North Vancouver Island, I've been engaging with the executive director from the Satsumit Society, what we call our Indigenous approach, and there are a number of First Nations that have come forward wanting to pool those monies within the organization, because we know too well that $30,000 is not going to create a great big program or even a part-time staff member to facilitate that, especially if you're like from a community where I'm from, where it's a fly-in community. And so we're turning our attention to how do we pool the money together for those nations that are in that situation and envision how it's going to meet the needs of our community through the Satsumit Society. And as has been recognized in many reports, every First Nation finds themselves at very different places in terms of capacity and development on this issue. And so then we have to turn our minds to the very state of each nation and what are the tools that are required to facilitate that work that is so critical. And so I'm looking forward for us to be able to move forward with this. And, like we all know, $30,000 doesn't go far. It barely gets outside the parking lot in many ways. But if we can get enough together, we can start to build that we need. Thanks.
Microphone 4, please.
Last bit of information. I just wanted to clarify. I was digging through information to find out a bit more about the $30,000. Now, when I was speaking with British Columbia, they had advised me that they were going to be distributing $30,000 to community, but looking at the information that was sent, it does not look like it's just going to be sent. It looks like you have to apply. So it says, we wanted to bring to your attention to a province of BC funding opportunity available to all First Nation communities in BC through the Ministry of Children and Family Development. Each First Nation community is eligible to apply for up to $30,000 to deliver prevention and family support services in their communities. In order to be eligible, each community must complete the attached proposal template describing community needs, program objectives, planned activities, and expected outcomes. Some communities may wish to work collaboratively with other communities, noting that each community is still eligible for up to $30,000. All project activities must be completed by March 31st, 2018. There's a quick turnaround time for these applications. The deadline for completed application to be submitted is Friday, October 20th at 4:30.
Thank you very much for you both to come forward to accommodate us in our schedule. We can tell that you know these topics to be able to come forward a day early. I do have a small token of appreciation for both of you. And we lift our hands to you for coming forward today. Koksham. And speaking of accommodating, we've actually bumped our lunch up by a little bit, and it is just about right now. And so on that note, we're going to call forward Alec Dan to do a blessing of the table.
Once again, share a table song, an honor song. We need to keep nourished, through times like this. And so I'll just sing the table song and turn it back over after I'm done. Thanks to the Creator to give us food, nourish our bodies, nourish our souls, our hearts and minds, and also giving thanks to the cooks that prepared that meal. So enjoy lunch.
Aichka, thank you so very much. Can we lift our hands again to you for coming forward to look after us in such a good way? Just a reminder, he will be coming forward again with the Wolf Pack for a cultural presentation at 12:30. We are going to recess now. We are going to officially reconvene at 1 p.m. where we're going to be doing an honoring of Liz Logan, the former BCAFN board director, following that with Minister Carolyn Bennett, the Crown Indigenous Relations Minister, and then the National Inquiry Chief Commissioner, Marilyn Bowler. So we invite you to come back here about 12:30. There are some spots here to my left. There's 6 seats, so if you're off on the side and you, for a Chiefs of Proxy, we do certainly invite you to come on this side. We are using this side for presentations, but certainly this side is available, so there's 6 seats here to invite you to the table. Thank you so very much, and we'll reconvene at 1.